Hey nerds, what's up? So if you caught my live with Jimmy of the Fantasy Network a few weeks ago, you'll know that on the live we were discussing the Hugos, and it was during that live I discovered how the Hugos are actually decided, and it blew my mind. I found out that anyone can vote in the Hugos for a small fee. And here I was thinking that it was like a panel of judges or a panel of experts. Now, I quizzed you guys both on my Instagram and on my YouTube to see who knew this. And on my YouTube, which got more responses, 1,000 of you responded and 93% of you said you had no idea how the Hugos were chosen, leaving only 7% to think that they knew. But some of those 7% wrote in my comments like, well, isn't it a panel of judges? So I don't even think that many people actually knew. And you know what this revelation means? Deep dive time. So today we're going to look at 3 of the most popular fantasy and science fiction awards, the Hugos, the Nebulas, and the World Fantasy Award. And we're going to talk about how the winners of those awards are chosen, any controversies that have surrounded the awards, as well as a discussion on whether or not we should give these awards the power that we currently do. An important note before we start, I will mostly be focusing on the larger written works, such as novel or novella or short stories. I know that these awards give out other prizes to things like with visual medium and graphic novels and podcasts, but to keep things simple, I'm gonna really just be focusing on the large written works that tend to get the most recognition. See you after the jump. Let's start with the Hugo Awards, since that seems to be kind of the biggest and the most respected. The first Hugo Award was given out in 1939. The Hugo Awards are awarded through the World Science Fiction Society, or the WFSF, also known as just the Society. Now, there's a constitution for the Hugo Awards, but it actually changes every year, and it depends on where Worldcon is being held. So it turns out the Hugos are very tied to Worldcon. It's kind of confusing because there's like the Society, the Hugos, and Worldcon, but they're all kind of mixed together. So most of the stuff I'll be talking about today comes from the 2021 Constitution that was released last year. So I read that entire Constitution, and it's mostly outlines like eligibility for the Hugo Awards, including things like when something has to be published by, eligibility based on word counts for each category, as well as specifications for what makes something actually professionally published, as well as special rules for books that were released a while ago, but they're being like re-released in English for the first time. Now that's interesting, but it's not really the focus of my video, so if you want to know more about that, you could go read the Constitution. I'll link all my sources below. But here's the thing. To nominate works for the Hugo and vote on the winners, the only thing you have to do is be a part of the Society. And how do you join the Society? All you have to do is buy a ticket to Worldcon. Now, there are 2 types of tickets that will allow you to vote in the Hugos. There's one called an attending ticket and one called a support ticket. As you can imagine, an attending ticket is a ticket that allows you to attend Worldcon, and so also comes with perks such as attending like the events there, like special panels, as well I think as getting a copy of a lot of the works. I couldn't really figure out how many works you get, but it definitely says like a copy of the Hugo works and all those sorts of things. So that one's obviously the most expensive ticket and will run you $325 US. Now the supporting ticket is somebody who basically wants to vote in the Hugos but can't attend Worldcon. So this is much cheaper, but all you really get to do is vote, and this ticket will run you $50. So yes, I'm sorry, you heard that right. All you have to do to vote in the Hugos is pay $50. This blew my mind. I always thought it was like some panel of experts, or at least like other authors or agents or something. It made me like question why I put so much on the Hugos, and it also made me kind of surprised at some of the winners in the past, if this is the case. And then I started being like, is this a good way to decide winners? Should it be something different? So those are topics we'll discuss later. Now, I also want to take a moment to talk about how the Hugo winners are calculated, because after some controversies in the past, which we'll talk about a little bit in our controversy section, they actually vastly changed how they calculate nominations to stop people from block voting or log rolling. So first, every person involved gets to nominate 5 works in each category, or up to 5 works. You don't have to do all 5. Now this has been the same for a long time. That's not the part that changed. But recently, I think it was 2017, they changed so that you no longer have to meet a certain threshold of votes to make it into the top 6 nominees. Previously, you had to get at least 5% of the vote. Otherwise, they wouldn't just have 6 nominees. They might only have like 3 or 4 because they had to reach that threshold. Now it doesn't matter, and they're gonna take the top 6 no matter what. Also, their new scoring system is called E Pluribus us Hugo. First, the total number of nominations a work gets and appears on a ballot is tallied. That seems normal and straightforward. You'd think it would end there, but then they've added another layer. Next, a single point is assigned to each person's ballot, and that point is divided equally among all of the works they nominated. Then all of those kind of minuscule points are added together for each individual nomination and added to the first tally. Then the works with the two lowest scores are compared and the lowest one is dropped out, and then they redo the calculations all over again. This confused me a lot, but I think if I'm understanding it right, it basically means every time your nomination gets voted off your ballot, the more power your single point has. Because the less nominations on your ballot, the more your point is worth. So I guess that also means if you nominate less, you have more points. And for some reason, that doesn't quite make sense to me on how it's stopping block voting, but I guess it does. Someone tell me how. I was just a little confused by that. So in 2019, 1,800 people voted for the Hugos. This has gone up steadily over the years with a huge jump between 2008 and 2009, which almost doubled the number of votes from somewhere in the 400s to almost 800. There was also a random high in 2016 with almost 4,000 voters, so I don't know what made that year special. I don't really know what things fluctuate in. Maybe 2016's Worldcon was particularly special and so more people attended and thus more people voted. I felt really surprised that basically this is a popular vote as long as people know about it, but it doesn't follow trends that you would think normal popular votes follow. When you think of places like Reddit where you have votes on like the best fantasy, the very popular authors with large fandoms tend to dominate results. You know, fandoms that really come hard for their authors like George R.R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, Robert Jordan, Patrick Rothfuss. All of those kind of authors who have contributed significant works in the last decade or so tend to have very loyal followers that try to vote bomb them wherever they are. Yet, as far as I can tell, I looked up all of those authors, and while a couple of them have been nominated, none of them have won Hugo for Best Novel, which really surprised me. Now, Brandon Sanderson won for a novella, and George R.R. Martin, if I'm reading it correctly, won for a bunch of like shorter works. None of them have won a Hugo, which when you think of popular voting, you would think following trends, one of them would have. Let's be clear, I'm not passing judgment on that or saying that's how it should be. I'm just expressing surprise that it hasn't happened based on popular voting trends that I've seen on other open websites. So what is it about people who visit Worldcon or know that they can vote in the Hugos that kind of bucks those trends? It's also worth noting that as far as I can tell, there's absolutely no requirement that says you have to read every finalist before you vote. So I think there's probably a lot of voters who just vote for the one thing they've read, or maybe they've read a couple works and they don't bother reading them all, which I do think would skew results. Now let's move on to the Nebula Awards, which started in 1965. The voters for the Nebula Award must be either full, senior, or associate members of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America Incorporated. I think I got that right. Now, the Nebula Awards have very similar qualifications for getting nominated as the Hugos in terms of what requirements they meet, so we're not going to really get into that. It is important to note that an author does not have to be a member of the SFWA to be considered for a Nebula Award, which is important because of what we're going to talk about in a moment. Because unlike the Hugos, you actually do have to meet a few requirements to be able to become the type of member that would allow you to vote in the Nebulas. Now, there are many different ways to be a member, but as only full, senior, and associate members can vote, those are the three memberships we're going to focus on today. To become a full member, it costs $100 a year, and it requires you to meet certain requirements to prove that you are an author. So there are things like how much you've been paid for every word you've written, or how much of an advance you've gotten, how many works you have published in a certain amount of time. And they've even added a way for self-published authors to be a part of this by adding how much money you have earned in a calendar year based on a self-published work. So basically you're kind of proving that you've met some sort of threshold in earnings to become a member. Now, I was surprised. I didn't feel like these qualifications were quite as high as I would have expected, but they do require that your works be in English. Associate members only pay $90 a year, and their requirements are less than becoming a full member. So basically, you just have sold less or have written less. And finally, a senior member is simply a member who has been a part of the society for more than 30 years, and they no longer have to pay membership dues. The SFWA has about about 2,000 members. Now, I couldn't find a breakdown of how many of those members actually vote in the Nebulas every year, but that gives us a ballpark that about the same number of people are probably voting in the Nebulas as vote in the Hugos. The judges also nominate 5 per category in the Nebulas, but as far as I could tell in my research, they just do a straight calculation, like how many got nominated, the highest amount of nominations, those are our nominees. It's also important to note that it seems like there is a much greater emphasis on the Nebula judges reading all of the works, as they specifically talk about making the works available to their members to make sure they have read them before voting. So I don't know if they like check up on it, but it definitely seems more of an emphasis. Okay, and finally our last one, the World Fantasy Awards. The first World Fantasy Convention was held in 1975. Now, like the Hugos, the World Fantasy Awards are tied to a convention. Now, the World Fantasy Awards are actually determined by a combination of people who attend the convention and also a panel of judges. It's almost like a combination of the Hugos and Nebulas when we come to judging. Now, the Association of the World Fantasy Awards picks 6 judges every year to be a part of the panel. So it's a new 6 judges every year. Now, I couldn't find a lot of information about how these judges are chosen, but they're mostly like authors and other people in the, book space. Now, this year when I looked at the judges, which I think there's only 5, 3 of them were authors, 1 was a literary agent, and 1 I think is a librarian. I really couldn't find any more information on how these people were chosen, if they applied. I was going in circles, so we're just gonna have to leave it at that. Otherwise, the other voters are just people who attend the World Fantasy Convention, just like in the Hugos. And just like the Hugos, there's an attending membership and a support membership. The attending membership is $200 and includes all that, attending con stuff. And the supporting member is just $50 and allows you just to vote. Now, the one difference between the Hugos and the World Fantasy Award is that if you buy a membership, you get to vote in 3 years of the World Fantasy Awards. So the people who attend the World Fantasy Convention get to nominate 2 nominees while the judges nominate the other 3, and then the judges are the eventual people who actually pick the winners from the 5. It's also very clear that the judges are required to read all of the final nominated works. Now, I want to talk a little bit about controversies surrounding these awards. Now, let's be clear, I'm only going to be talking about controversies concerning voting. So some of these awards have other controversies that have been, a part of them, but I'm specifically looking at the voting ones. So obviously the Hugos, which have been running the longest and are, the largest, have had the most controversies. The biggest one happened in 2014 and is referred to as Sad Puppies. Basically, the Sad Puppies is a self-named group in 2014 whose goals were to celebrate science fiction works that return the genre to its space opera roots, and second, to celebrate works by politically conservative authors whose views may sit outside the mainstream of the current community. Basically, they gave out this list of approved nominations that followed their goals that I just stated and widely circulated it. Now, this was technically legal. They didn't break any Hugo rules, but it was wildly successful in influencing the nominations that year and, who got nominated and ultimately, who won. This was actually one of the main reasons voting rules were changed, was to stop the ability for this kind of like block voting to influence future awards. Now, this happened a few more times, and then there was like an offshoot of Sad Puppies called Rabbit Puppies. It's a little confusing, but they succeeded in 2016 in getting somebody nominated for, I think, the best novella. They nominated this person based on their kind of strange title, thinking that it would throw a wrench in things for the Hugos, but it ended up backfiring because the author ended up being very outspoken for inclusion and particularly representation of the kind of authors that Sad Puppies and Rabbit Puppies were trying to disclude, so that kind of turned around on them. And then it happened again in 2017 where they were able to nominate an author and work which are very not safe for work. Like, it literally reads like a junior high joke. If you are very interested in looking it up, you can look up Hugo's 2017 Sticks. You'll probably get there. So basically, it was mostly just voting blocks trying to over-influence the Hugos in a way that most people didn't really agree with. For the Nebulas, the SFWA released a statement in 2019 talking about an inappropriate use of sway in the Facebook group 20 Books to 50K, which is actually a self-published group I am somewhat familiar with. The whole premise of that group is that if you write 20 books and self-publish them, you will be able to make $50,000 a year. So it's basically a group of authors who are trying to make a living on being self-published. Now, they felt a list that Facebook group released giving recommendations of self-published books to try and get nominated for the Nebulas unfairly swayed the results. Now, I will say the leader or whoever was the spokesperson for the 20 books to 50K did write a statement saying it was not their intention to influence the Nebulas that way, that they were really just trying to get self-published books more known so they had the possibility of being nominated now that the Nebulas have changed the rules to allow self-published books, and that it wasn't his intention to create this block voting. And then honestly, I couldn't find any voting controversies within the World Fantasy Awards. So do awards mean anything? I can't help it. The fact that you can pay $50 to vote in the Hugos feels really weird to me. It just doesn't feel official. And for some reason, I want it to feel official. Of course, what really makes things official when it comes to fantasy books is a blend of authors and literary agents and librarians or whoever's involved really make a difference? Is that official? Are those the end-all be-all on what makes something good? Does having judges make something more legit? Of course, this brings back that argument that I've made in a few videos talking about is critics versus popular and what really makes something good, and can we really discount something just because it's popular? I don't think so. So we don't really want to get in that discussion again. But I do feel like one thing that feels weird about the Hugos beyond that is that I think most people think it's a set of judges or experts voting. And I think that's what feels more off. I feel like if it was more known widely that the Hugos are basically just anybody can vote if you pay, I think we might feel differently about the Hugos than we do. I know it's certainly changed my mind on how I view the Hugos. So I think that's what's so strange about it, is that so many fantasy nerds and readers don't know. And it's not just like popularity contests is the only thing that matters. I'd be really interested in kind of two different awards. You've got the popularity awards, which are probably things that like sold the most and are widely available, but then also having awards to people who tried to push the boundaries or give new ideas, I think are equally important. Some of those may not stand the test of time, but some of them probably will and even grow better over time. I do think you need both. But something about the Hugos feels weird as it currently stands. The truth is all awards fall prey to this. Like, there just doesn't seem a good way to judge things. I mean, all the awards, like the Grammys have tons of controversies, the Academy Awards, all of these things, they fall prey to like, who died and made you the expert, but also like, I kind of want an expert and not just a popular vote. So sometimes I feel like the idea of awards are actually better than the implementation of it, because the problem with like straight popular vote is you get kind of like larger fandoms bombing things. And then with the judges, it's just kind of like the decision of like, who's judging. Honestly, based on my research, if I had to choose, I actually kind of like the way the World Fantasy Awards does it. The way they have 2 nominations come from a more popular vote, and then judges that change every year nominate other ones and choose the eventual winner, and having to read them. I think that's ironic though, because I feel like the World Fantasy Awards are the lesser of the 3 awards when we consider how much they're talked about. Like, I hear much more about the Hugos and the Nebulas, and particularly the Hugos. And I wonder if that's just because the Hugos started first, and so they have the most attention. I don't really know why that is, but it made me feel like maybe I should try to pay more attention to the World Fantasy Awards. Okay, so let me know if you were as surprised by this information as I was. Also let me know, like, should I vote in the next year's Hugos? Should I pay $50 and vote? You tell me in the comments. How do you feel about the awards and how they are awarded? Is there any information I missed in this deep dive that might contextualize or change my opinion based on what I presented? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like deep dives like this, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading along with other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.